Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Engineering Career Coach podcast. Today I'm talking with Robyn Clark. She's the founder and chief executive officer of WinningWise Incorporated. We'll be talking about the critical roles of performance management, employee development, and culture in the engineering field. I'm your host, Jeff Perry. I'm a leadership and career development expert and author of The Intentional Engineer. You can find more information on my work at jeff-perry.com. And this is the Engineering Career Coach podcast brought to you by EMI, the first podcast dedicated to helping engineers and technical professionals with both their personal and professional development. Now it's time to jump into the main segment of our episode today. I have the pleasure to have with me Robyn Clark. Robyn, welcome to the Engineering Career Coach podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, Robyn, I want to get to know you a little bit, or help our listeners get to know you a little bit, to talk a little bit about your journey. You've done a number of things in terms of career development, succession planning, performance management. How did you get into this role in these areas, and what was the motivation for all of that?
Right. Yeah, for me, it's really just, I've been lucky to honestly work in an area that I just have complete and utter passion for, and have had since I met it. I was a social worker originally, and I used to work in a runaway shelter and a battered women's shelter. And I started originally doing all of the outreach work, a lot of training of police, suicide prevention in schools. And then we had a crisis center, and I would do a lot of family crisis work, et cetera. And I loved all of that. And what I really loved the most was the teaching and the education and helping people raise their awareness, et cetera. And then as I got a little older and learned a little bit more about careers, because honestly, what I learned is I didn't know anything about careers. Back in my early 20s, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just marching along to whatever other people told me. But as I realized, this whole thing around learning and development began to form into its own field. And then that blew into organizational development, and now talent management. It's continued to unfold. And I ended up getting a job in a bank as a teller trainer. And it doesn't sound fun or exciting, but I'll tell you, from day one, what I loved about it was all the learning and the education and the just opportunity to help people grow. And the truth is, I got lucky enough to have the world's best boss. She was my mentor and best friend for all of the years of my career, and really taught me everything that I felt like I needed as a foundation to get to know and to fall in love with this field. And so I think you need that. It's really important to find that mentor, that person who can educate and inspire and kind of be tough with you too. All of that is really important in order to help grow you into the person that you want to be. So I ended up following that path. I worked for a couple of banks, and then I spent a good 10 years with Franklin Covey, helping them design seminars and teach those all over the country. And I had an amazing run with that. And I've started 2 companies in this field myself. And this one, which we call WinningWise, is I've had for 10 years. I'm really focused on organizational and talent development. And, I'm going to be doing some version of this work forever. I always tell people, if you end up in the old folks home with me, we're going to be talking about our lives, our goals, and our careers, because this is just the stuff I love. So we have built an organization around it, and we serve many different companies, from big ones to small ones, and really are just, love working with people that are growth-minded and care about the capability and want to build even a better future for themselves and those around them.
Yeah, so you've been in this space for quite a while now. Yeah. As businesses and markets and in our world, technology continues to change rapidly. Why do we need to be talking about these things internal, instead of saying, hey, what's the next product and what's the next technology we need to be working on? Why do we need to be talking about developing talent in the organization and the people inside of that, from your perspective?
For a long time, nobody could figure that out. They didn't know why they had to talk about it, and they really didn't want to, but they would talk about a lot of other things. I had one client call me and say, we talk about everything but our people. We talk about our capital equipments, our budgets, our expenditures. And then if you really look at what we spend money on, the number one thing we spend money on, and they were an engineering company, by the way, is people. And so you really have to talk about people, because it's people that actually make your business run. And
Yes.
so, we kind of need each other. The businesses need people and people need the businesses. It's together that we create that shared success. And so, we really need to talk about how we can be at our best to make that happen, where we have to be innovative with our strategies, how we play in the market, we have to be decisive about the kinds of things we're going to spend money on. We have to be the same way with people. We need people and talent strategies. We have to be thoughtful about who goes into what roles. We have to be thoughtful about growing and engaging people in those roles and creating organizations that attract the right people to the organization, and then are building and growing so they have a future and they have people for roles as they continue to expand. So I don't know how you can't talk about it. And I think businesses are beginning to realize, even if they don't want to talk about it all the time, they have to talk about it.
Yeah. Because if we don't take care of the people are the ones who take care of the clients, the customers, that create,
Absolutely.
design, and implement and support the products and services that we do. And without the people, nothing happens. So I'm curious, in this really broad category, when we're talking about kind of performance management and helping the people grow and develop and gain the capabilities and skills and also work collaboratively and everything that we think about doing there. One of the words that comes to mind for me is this word of alignment, where the people in the business, we're trying to align what they do and the skills that they're developing and all of that with the needs of the business as well, so that the person is growing in a direction that they feel excited about, so that they're engaged and working on things that they can connect with, as well as obviously doing great work for the organization. So what do you think about this word of alignment when we think about how to do performance management in this modern workplace with maybe changing expectations? We're getting to different generations and all the different challenges there.
Yeah, I think a lot about that. So I think alignment is one issue, which I can talk about really quick. And then I can share just a couple of what I think are really important principles in performance management that make it better, that can kind of be practiced on both the org and the individual side. But the alignment, when I think of alignment, I think of it as what we call shared success. Meaning that I have to, as an individual, I have to align myself with an organization so that I can do two things in that process. One, I have to meet my own needs so that I can make myself happy and productive in that work. It's super cool if you run into a boss or a colleague, or you get a team that is really interested in meeting your needs, but that doesn't always happen for people. So I have to find a way to navigate and negotiate in my work and in the way that I do my work to get my own needs met. The second thing that I really have to do with alignment is understand the needs of the organization. And that could be at multiple layers. That could be my boss. It could be my team. It could be the, senior executive group. I have to understand the needs of the organization, and I need to meet those. If I don't do that, it's going to be hard for me to continue to grow with greater opportunity. If I do that at the expense of my needs, I'm not going to want to hang out with them very long. And if, I do that at the, expense of their needs, they're not going to want me hanging out for very long, right? So, right. So in order for success to work, it's got to be shared. And that's where the alignment comes from. Now, orgs have to be thoughtful about creating talent and people strategies that makes it easier rather than harder for people to get their needs met. If you're a leader or you're an organization and you're asking people to take charge of their careers and build their lives, etc., if you're doing all that, but you're putting bricks in their backpack while they try to go up the mountain with a crazy toxic culture or with unclear goals or, changing expectations every minute, if you make it harder, then people will pull back and do less, which will make it less likely that you're able to get your needs met as an organization. So together we have to make the sandbox cool so we can all play together. And then we have to be really clear on the needs and expectations on both sides so that we can align with that. That's how we stay connected, and that's how we can create this whole concept of shared success. Does that seem reasonable? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, because there's the needs on both sides. And so we get that alignment, and then it's the shared experience that everyone feels like they're a part of. So the employee feels like there's some bigger, they're a part of something that's bigger than them, but that also is aligning and taking care of them. But
Exactly.
also, instead of just the company looking out for them, they need to take ownership in that too. It's a shared experience on both sides on the ownership. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that we're talking about that we want to then grow on the organizational level, and certainly employees want this too, is things like employee satisfaction. Employee engagement gets a lot of talk around these days. If you look at some of the Gallup poll that comes out every year, certainly retention, because it's expensive to hire and recruit people and replace them and their skills and everything like that from an organizational perspective. So how do some of these things that we've been talking about with effective performance management contribute to satisfaction, engagement, and retention, and some of these other factors that are critical?
I think a lot of organizations are beginning to realize that they have to think of that almost as like the employee experience. Like what does it mean and what does it feel like for me as an employee to be here? Am I able to feel like I can make a strong contribution? Am I doing work that is meaningful that I can continue to get better at? Do I have relationships where I have a really cool balance of connection and autonomy? That's been a challenge, right? With all the remote work and all the wars and the battles going on inside companies right now with, should we be in the office? Should we not? How do we do hybrid? All of that is like a crazy battle between the C-suite and everybody else right at the moment. But that speaks to the employee experience, engagement, and all that other jazz. So it's those relationships, connection, and autonomy. The third kind of huge ingredient in the employee experience is what's my future? Right? Do I have a future here? What will I learn? How will I be stronger? Where can I grow? What other roles might be available for me? All of that, people really need to know they have a future. And I would say the fourth bucket is people want to have just a good time today. They want to feel like they can balance and work their life around their work. And they want to feel like they're rewarded and recognized fairly for what they're doing. So I think it's kind of those four areas, like the work, the relationships, the future, and the today, that really matter in creating the employee experience. And while no experience will be perfect, I think organizations have to choose what they want to major and minor in. And if they want to major and minor, for instance, in really being able to create a future for people, which, by the way, is very high in what people really need and want, then they have to make programs like performance management more developmental than evaluative. Now, I know that performance management often gets sort of hijacked for compensation, right? So they'll kind of hijack the whole growth and development out, and it becomes an assessment process. I get it. I understand the importance of assessment. And you also have to look at how much are we getting from that. If we're trying to decide between a 3 to a 3.5% raise, is it really are we really making a difference when we then make it so we make it so evaluative or assessment oriented and we pull the development aspect out of it? Or do you want to flip it? Do you want to flip it and make sure that you've got it as an employee growth and development program so that there really is focus and emphasis on what is important to you in your career? Here are the things that are going well. Here are things that they still work. And you could do this in order to grow. People miss that because they often don't have a separate program for that. So if they hijack performance management, turn it into an evaluation program, then they've usually got zero to work with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So you're saying that maybe we should be having performance management discussions around growing the people. That's not just evaluating them once a year to say, hey, this is how you've been doing this year. So here's the raise that you get, and that's it.
Exactly. Most companies are doing things like talent review too, right? A lot of people don't even know about it. Some people do, some people don't know about it. Most organizations do talent review, which also is an evaluative process. It's where a bunch of people go in a room and they talk about a whole bunch of other people. And then they make decisions, right, about these people's careers and where they're going or not. And those people are not in the room. I mean, people have to understand that unless you send really good agents of yours into that room to talk about you, then you don't know what that's going to yield for you. And for most people, it doesn't yield much. But what I'm saying is between talent review and if you make performance management all evaluative or assessment oriented, you've got double assessment and no growth and development going on. What I'm suggesting is make sure that talent review has a huge growth and development focus, that people know before you go into the room, they've had conversations with their leaders so their leaders can speak to their ambitions, they can speak to their strengths, they can speak to their developmental opportunities and how they're going to get them ready. Huge. For that to work well, there also needs to be sort of an organizational enterprise view of talent. In other words, my team doesn't belong to me. My team is all a part of the organization. And as a leader, I'm a steward in helping to grow our organization. But that's a struggle for leaders because, once they get attached or once they put effort into growing somebody, they don't want them going anywhere. So, but to do talent review in that way means that people have to have a bigger, more open mind. Now, you can't do it that way if you don't put a developmental aspect into performance management, where you really do a good job talking with people about their careers and their focus and where they're growing. And honestly, you have to talk often because nothing is static about the growth of an organization, the dynamics within it, or the growth of people.
Right. Yeah. And you're talking about like, hey, is it just going to be a talent review that a group of people is going to determine where you're going to take the next step in your career. And the person that we're talking about isn't in the room there. But also in my conversations and a lot of the things that we explored here on this podcast sometimes is that, especially for engineers who are so multifaceted, that there are so many directions they could take their career, they're not even sure where they want to go and what the options are in front of them. So part of that is the organization helping them see what possible paths are there and what those growth paths look like. And like you said, having those conversations but also providing experiences to help them do some of that work to say, well, this is where my strengths lie and my interests lie. And so then I'm going to try some things out to see if I want to go this path. And if it's not that path, that's great. As their preferences change or the needs of the organization change, say, hey, we might be able to groom you over here. That could be a great fit too. But it's a collaborative, shared ownership experience like you talked about earlier.
Absolutely. Right? And I think it's really important. Career pathing does really matter. And that's a place where the organization can play in order to make the offer that they have more clear. It's so that people can take advantage of that, right? And so I think that can be helpful. Number one, with that, most engineering companies that care about it will kind of look at a technical path and a leadership path, right? Because not every technical person is not only not meant to be a leader, but doesn't have any interest in being a leader. And there's nothing worse than getting a leader that doesn't want to be one. It's not good for the company and it's not good for the people. And you might actually be losing out on what that person is so good at. And so, if they're just really good at technical surprises and innovation and amazing thinking, you may not want to lose out on that opportunity. So it's really important to be able to, create those paths. But just because you create the tracks and you create the paths or the steps doesn't mean that people are prepared to walk them. So that's where development really comes into play. Companies right now that I can think of that we've talked to that, they're really focused on career pathing. And I understand the importance of that.
Right.
And if you do that alone without really looking at how people move from step to step and getting them ready to move from step to step, you won't see much difference in terms of outcomes.
Right. It's not just here's the different steps you can take, but how do we go through that growth process and layer on the skills and capabilities and competencies along the way to help you be ready for that and do that well.
Right.
Again, and in alignment with interests and needs on both sides.
And there's one thing I would add about competencies that you mentioned. A lot of companies like to focus growth and development around competencies. I get it. They're what we want from people, right? There's two things that companies want from people. They want you to meet your goals, right?
Yeah.
And they want you to to bring good competencies and skill sets to the work, whether it's communication or strategic thinking or team development or whatever it is.
Sure.
They want you to bring these good competencies. Both of those things, goals and competencies, are outcomes. Neither of those are development.
Right.
The question for development is, how can I, Robyn, personally change me so that I can do better at the competencies that you expect of me?
Right.
Like what I always say especially to an engineer, right? The three dreaded words of development are, you need to be more strategic. Like there's nothing worse than hearing you need to be more strategic, because most people have literally no idea what that means, right? They're like, what do you want me to do? Think big thoughts, like talk more, talk less. Like, I don't know what you want from me.
Where do we start?
Exactly. So the question is, what does it look like? Help to understand what being strategic looks like. And then say, how does that affect me? To be more strategic, do I need to be more confident and just speak up, about some ideas that I have so people can see that I'm getting in the game? Do I need to be more planful and actually spend more time kind of looking at the big picture so that I have more to speak up about? Maybe I need that. Or maybe I need to have better relationships, to be more engaged with people that are working in other parts of the business so I simply understand it better. Because nobody gets out of bed on a Tuesday and says, this is my day, I'm going to bring it. I'm going to bring it strategic all day long.
Yes. Maybe someone does, but I think it's rare.
Yeah, no one doesn't. But they might think to themselves, I got a big meeting today, and I know that I want to show up aligned with the big picture. So I've got a couple of points that I'm really going to make sure that I am sharing and communicating in this meeting. Or I am going to make sure that I'm asking these questions so that I can really begin to understand better what the options are. In other words, I have to figure out what the change is for me to drive my performance in those competencies. Does that make sense?
Yep. Totally.
The personal change, that's development.
Yep.
And most companies confuse that.
Yeah.
They think the competency is development, and it's not.
You need to develop the people, and the competencies will be the outcomes that will come out of it.
Yes. I'm on a mission to clarify that, because I think organizations think if we just make our competency model and we tell everybody what it is, well, that ought to do it.
Yeah. Here's the list of competencies you need for the next step. Great. Okay. But what does that mean to actually go through the development process? Let's create that path, not just the career path, but the development path. Love it, Robyn. This is fun. So, Robyn, to support all this, I would love to talk about the concept of culture. We can go with that old quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast and all that stuff. So you don't even need to be strategic. You just have a great culture, right? But how does culture play a role? In your mind, what do we do to foster the culture besides just, maybe putting a sign on the wall saying, this is who we are, here's our vision and values and all that stuff. But what role does culture play when we're talking about performance and employee development and all these things that we've been talking about?
Culture obviously plays a huge role in everything, because it's the environment, the sandbox within which you live. And some elements of culture are identifiable and some you just feel, and people even have a hard time kind of wrapping their head around, what in the world culture is that you're in. One of the best ways to get people to, I guess, to really be able to play in the culture that you're looking for, like if you're an organization and you want to have an intentional culture, right? That you do when you put your values up on the wall and all that jazz. They want to have an intentional culture, but they don't often think about how we work together and what are the expectations that we have with one another. And when you want to get intentional about it, you have to really talk about, what do people really experience here every day? And what do we want them to experience here every day? And then why do we want that? And there's a couple areas that I think are really important that change and affect the culture. One is, what do you value? Do you really value the outcomes that people produce, or the behavior that they show up with. Now, I'm not saying those are mutually exclusive, but you know how it works when we value outcomes at the expense of good behaviors, right? We can have crazy behaviors run amok, and as long as you've hit their goals or you've driven in whatever you're supposed to drive in, we just sort of don't look at that. Now, we can also see the opposite where we're, we got everybody in the right behaviors and we've got no outcomes. So and most people want some sort of middle in that kind of a polarity, but what you measure and what you look at will really define what's in your culture. That's one thing that's really important. Right.
Sometimes in engineering, we might identify someone who is creating, good outcomes, outputting a lot, but maybe not great behaviors. We might call that person a brilliant jerk.
Exactly. Competent jerk, sometimes we'll call it. Yeah. But yes. And so you have to decide, is that okay in your culture or is that not? And then what do you do in order to create those shifts? Because those kinds of experiences, they determine the culture, not the values on the wall.
Right.
The other thing that is really important in terms of culture is how decisions are made.
Yeah.
Right? Do you want people when they're making decisions to be sort of risk-taking and innovative and bold? Or do you want people to follow rules and be predictable and stable? That's huge in culture too, because we are all making decisions all day long. I mean, that's the whole purpose of being a leader, is to make decisions. And how far down in the organization do you empower? And what does that look like? And what do you want people to be thinking about? How do you want them to be performing? And it can be very different in organizations. And it's really important to think about that, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think the other polarity that plays huge into culture is this a collaborative or a competitive group? Or maybe even the word is cooperate versus compete. And then collaboration falls somewhere in the middle of that. But so often people can have a lot of competition within organizations as opposed to saving your competition for outside the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, you have to make some really intentional decisions around what you want the experience of people to be, then set your values according to that, then get really clear about what your competencies are according to that, and then have real serious conversations with people about goals, competencies, and what you're looking for and how to develop people to go in the direction you want to go. And that's not going to be simple, but it is possible to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Robyn, with all this, we've got a number of people who are listening who are leaders of organizations. And so they're like, okay, all these things that we've talked about are from, it's a lot to do, right? So, but if you're talking to a leader who's just starting on this path of implementing good, solid performance management processes, what would you say is the first step to really dig into, to say, this is where just get started, get a little momentum to get going on this, if this is something you want to do?
To be a person who's kind of driving performance management for others?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say to get really comfortable with having conversations. Get real, right. You don't have to make it so difficult in terms of goal setting and all of that. Get really comfortable talking to people about hard subjects. And I know that's not easy, but if you can do that, you can go a long way in that. Like if you can have real meaningful feedback conversations where you can help people understand the reality of what they're at, the situation, the behaviors and the impact, that's really helpful. If you can help people see the reality, and then you can really help people to orient towards the future. And like, instead of where we are today, this is what I'd really like to see. What would that look like? And together start to brainstorm that. You can create a real partnership and growth. And so I think if you can get really comfortable having conversations, you can absolutely change performance management, take the terror out of it for everyone. No one loves filling out the forms. I get it. But that's not the part that they feel terrorized by. They feel terrorized by the conversations.
Right.
And so if you can develop this skill and capability for leaders, and you can develop that for yourself, it won't feel so overwhelming and scary.
Okay, I want to challenge you on this question. We talked about competencies versus the development process. So we might call having these conversations, these difficult conversations, to be a competency or skill.
Mm-hmm.
what does the development process look like for someone who's saying, okay, I want to do that. How do I develop that skill?
Oh, super good question. I think it's going to depend on the person, but here's some examples. For one person, it might be confidence. I've really got to have my courage, and I've got to have my ability to speak boldly, clearly, and concisely around feedback. It might be confidence for somebody. For somebody else, it could be self-awareness, because I really may need to be more aware of who I am and how others experience me so that I can be more vulnerable and authentic in those conversations, right? I don't need confidence. I got lots of that. But, nobody thinks that I see my role in what makes situations challenging. And so we don't really negotiate that. We don't really figure that out together. I just push that feedback onto you. That's not helpful either. It might be for somebody else that they just need to have better relationships outside of those conversations, right? Like they need a fan base. I call that a fan base, so that when you go to have those conversations, everybody's on the same side. And if you don't spend time with people, you don't support them in their work, you don't build that kind of fan base, well, you're going to have a little trouble when it comes to those conversations. So not everybody has to do the same thing to be really good at those. But you are correct. That is a competency. Now I have to look at how I can personally change or grow in order to be able to deliver on that. Those are just a couple of examples.
Okay, perfect. Well, Robyn, this has been such a fun conversation. At this point, we're going to go transition over into our Take Action Today segment of the show. Okay. When we come back, we'll get one final piece of actionable advice from Robyn. We'll be right back. Now it's time for our Take Action Today segment of the show. Now, Robyn, we've talked about a whole lot of things from the individual to the organizational level around performance management and culture and leadership and everything in between. But let's personalize this to our listeners now. When we're thinking about how do I develop in my career or whatever organization I am in or want to be in, what's the final piece of advice you would give for our listeners to take action on so they can take ownership and move forward with intention?
I'd say for everybody, there is no way to overlook the power of a meaningful development plan. I mean, to really develop it yourself, not wait for your boss to give you the plan, but to really think about it yourself based on what is important to me? Like, what kind of needs do I have that I want met in my work that are not currently happening? Like, what is it that I'm looking for? What's really important for me? That's one. The second place to really be able to be sure that you have a meaningful development plan is to seek feedback. Feedback seeking behavior is really related to absolute much higher. I think it's around 65% greater happiness and success when you are seeking feedback. So seek feedback from people that you value. Use that information along with your needs to create what your plan ought to be. And once you think that through, get in conversation with someone you trust, because you'll need someone to bounce those ideas off of, to refine ideas a little bit, to figure out what your action steps are going to be, and then you can get to growing in those areas. But the more that you enlist the people around you in your growth, the more opportunity that tends to create for you at work, because people don't see other people grow. They have to be engaged in the process of your growth, and then they see you as ready for future roles. So don't forget about the power of partnering, and don't try to do development alone, because it is not a solo act.
Yeah, it's not an isolated experience. We need to be doing that with people so that we can learn from others and help them see our growth and help us along that path as well.
Yes.
So, Robyn, thank you so much for a great conversation. I'm sure after this conversation, there's probably some people who are interested in learning more about you and your company and some of the programs that you offer and things. Where would you point them to learn some more?
Oh, thank you. That would be terrific. WinningWise.com, WINNINGWISE, just like it sounds, .com. And you can see all that we do there in talent and org development. We do it all over the U.S. You can also see a video and a bunch of things on our GrowWise program, which is a personal growth lab designed to help people identify their development plan and then be able to get growing in that plan and project their careers in the direction that they want to take it. we also have tons of articles and blogs and all that stuff. We're always writing and talking on this particular subject. So we got all sorts of stuff there too in our insight section that could be valuable. And we, get linked in with me on LinkedIn if you want to, just Robyn Clark at WinningWise, because we're always doing webinars and additional things that may be helpful just for you as a person, as an employee, as a leader, and if you're a talent practitioner, even more so.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks so much for being here and sharing all your wonderful insights with us, and look forward to hearing more good things that you and your team put out in the days and years to come. Thanks so much.
You are welcome. Thanks, Jeff.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, and questions. You can go to engineeringmanagementinstitute.org. We can find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books that we mentioned during this episode. And don't forget to check out any upcoming live webinars or events at engineeringmanagementinstitute.org. As a quick note, this is our last episode we'll be doing for a while, as we've decided to take a quick break with this podcast. But we've got so many historical episodes, so make sure to go back and check them out, and we'll be sure to let you know when we come back. Until then, I wish you the best in all of your engineering endeavors.